The emissary's plan worked with devastating efficiency. 2 weeks after Derek departed for Dunhold, he returned to Hywyn with news that sent ripples through the royal court. Baron Cedric had reacted exactly as Elswyn predicted, with panic, poorly disguised as outrage. The carefully planted rumor that Lady Elswyn intended to make formal accusations against a northern noble had caused him to make a critical error. He had publicly demanded that King Alaric surrender the impostor claiming connection to House Dunhold for judgment in the north. In one ill-considered diplomatic missive, Cedric had confirmed what many had only suspected, that the king's advisor from the south was indeed his supposedly deceased wife. The royal council gathered in emergency session as dawn broke over Hywyn Castle. Maps and correspondence littered the massive oak table, including Cedric's demand delivered by special messenger the previous evening. "He claims you are a fraud who stole his late wife's identity," Lord Commander Thorne summarized, reading from the parchment, "yet simultaneously demands your return to Dunhold for proper investigation. The contradiction is apparent to anyone with sense." Elswyn sat composed near the center of the table, though her knuckles were white where her hands clasped in her lap. She wore a gown of Thalwyn blue with intricate silver embroidery, no longer attempting to appear as merely a foreign advisor, but embracing her position in the kingdom that had become her home. "Baron Cedric has exposed himself with remarkable efficiency," Chancellor Merrin observed, adjusting his spectacles. "His demand confirms both Lady Elswyn's identity and his awareness that she lives, despite having publicly announced her death months ago." King Alaric stood at the head of the table, his expression thunderous as he studied the map showing the latest positions of Cedric's forces. He wore a fitted leather doublet reinforced with light chainmail beneath, his preferred attire when war seemed imminent. "His alliance with House Halford hangs in the balance," Alaric noted. "Duke Darius would never condone a man who abandoned his pregnant wife to die. Cedric knows his betrothal to Lady Maera will collapse if the truth emerges. Hence the urgency of his demands," Elswyn added, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions within. "He must either discredit me or silence me before word reaches Halford." Lord Reynard, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, finally spoke. "The political ramifications extend beyond Dunhold and Halford. Several northern houses have pledged support to Baron Cedric based on the promised alliance. If that union dissolves, old rivalries may resurface. You suggest we should surrender Lady Elswyn to maintain northern stability?" Thorne asked incredulously. "I suggest nothing of the sort," Reynard replied smoothly, merely observing the complexities at play. Lady Elswyn's resurrection has implications far beyond one nobleman's reputation. Alaric's jaw tightened visibly. "Lady Elswyn remains under my protection. That is not negotiable." The finality in his tone silenced further discussion on that point. Elswyn felt a rush of gratitude, though she kept her expression neutral before the council. "The question before us," she said carefully, "is how to respond to Baron Cedric's demand in a way that protects Thalwyn's interests while exposing his treachery." "A public denial would be most direct," Chancellor Merrin suggested. "Acknowledge your identity officially and detail the circumstances of your abandonment." "Which would force Cedric into either admitting his actions or calling our king a liar," Thorne pointed out. "Either way, conflict becomes inevitable." Elswyn considered the map thoughtfully. "Perhaps there's another approach, one that separates Cedric from his allies before confrontation becomes necessary." All eyes turned to her expectantly. The months of council service had earned her the right to be heard, even from those initially skeptical of her place at the table. "We send emissaries. Not to Dunhold, but to Halford," she proposed. "Not to expose Cedric's actions directly, but to invite Duke Darius to Thalwyn for trade negotiations. Once here, he would naturally encounter me, forcing him to reconcile the living woman before him with reports of your death," Alaric concluded, a hint of admiration in his voice. "Without Thalwyn making direct accusations against Cedric." "Precisely. The Duke is known for his honor and shrewd judgment. Let him draw his own conclusions when faced with evidence he cannot dismiss." Lord Commander Thorne nodded slowly. "It could work. Duke Darius has long sought improved trade routes through our southern ports. A proposal to discuss such arrangements would not seem suspicious. And should he decline? Reynard challenged. Then we proceed with a more direct approach, Alaric replied decisively. But Elswyn's strategy offers a path that might isolate Cedric without plunging the realm into unnecessary conflict. The council continued discussing logistics, but the core decision had been made. By mid-morning, messengers rode north toward Halford Castle, bearing formal invitations from King Alaric. The careful dance of politics and truth had begun. Later that evening, Elswyn stood alone in the eastern tower of Highwind Castle, watching the sunset paint the countryside in hues of gold and crimson. The ancient stone battlements, worn smooth by centuries of wind and rain, felt solid beneath her hands, a reassuring permanence after months of uncertainty. She heard his footsteps before he spoke, the now familiar cadence of Alaric's measured stride echoing on the stone stairs. "I thought I might find you here," he said, joining her at the parapet. Without his crown or formal court attire, dressed simply in a leather tunic and breeches, he looked more man than monarch. "This tower has become your thinking place, hasn't it?" Elswyn smiled faintly. "It reminds me that some things endure, regardless of the storms they weather." "Like you," he observed quietly. The simple statement carried weight beyond its words. Their eyes met briefly before both turned back to the sunset. "The messengers are well on their way to Halford," Alaric continued after a moment. "Your strategy was brilliant, you know. Most of my advisors would have recommended immediate military posturing. War is rarely the most effective solution, though often the most tempting," she replied. "I learned that watching Cedric navigate political challenges, he always reached for his sword when his mind might have served him better." Alaric's hand rested on the stone beside hers, not quite touching but close enough that she could feel its warmth. "You've transformed the council these past months. They listen now, even Reynard, though he'd never admit it. Only because you gave my voice weight when it had none." Elswyn acknowledged. "I was a stranger, a refugee with a suspicious past. You could have kept me hidden away, a protected secret rather than a public advisor, and wasted one of the finest minds in the kingdom." "I think not." A smile touched his lips. "Besides, I've grown rather fond of watching you outmaneuver men who underestimate you." She laughed softly, the sound carried away by the evening breeze. "A petty pleasure, perhaps, but I confess I share it." They stood in comfortable silence as the last rays of sunlight faded from the horizon, leaving the landscape bathed in the soft blue light of dusk. Stars began to appear, first one by one, then in clusters across the darkening sky. Edrin smiled. "At me today," Alaric said suddenly. "A real smile, not the reflexive kind infants give. I was visiting the nursery to see my nephew, and when Edrin saw me, he smiled." The unexpected emotion in his voice caught Elswyn off guard. She turned to find his expression unguarded, vulnerable in a way she'd rarely witnessed. "He recognizes you," she said softly. "You've been present in his life since the beginning." "I never thought much about children before," Alaric admitted. "The succession, yes. The abstract notion that I should produce an heir eventually, but not the reality of a child, not until Idran." Something shifted in the air between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building gradually over months of shared counsel, shared meals, shared purpose. "Alaric," Elswyn began, uncertain how to navigate this uncharted territory between them. "I know," he interrupted gently. "The timing is complicated. Cedric's threat looms. The court watches our every interaction, and you've only just begun to establish your own identity here, separate from both your past and my protection." The fact that he understood her hesitation without her having to express it only confirmed how deeply they had come to know one another. "It's not just that," she replied, finally giving voice to concerns she'd held private. "I was a political asset to Cedric, valuable for my family connections and the lands I brought to our marriage. I cannot be that again, not even to a king I respect as much as I do you." Alaric turned to face her fully, his expression earnest. "You could never be merely a political asset to me, Elswyn. Surely you know that by now." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, "but the court would see it differently. the mysterious southern widow, who bewitched the king, advancing herself through his favor rather than her own merit. "Let them talk," he said with a dismissive gesture. "Court gossip is as constant as the tides. But perception shapes reality in politics, as you've taught me yourself." Elswyn stepped back slightly, creating necessary distance. "Whatever grows between us must withstand scrutiny not just from Thalwyn's nobility, but from all the kingdoms watching." Alaric studied her face in the fading light, respect mingling with frustration in his eyes. Always the voice of reason, even when reason demands patience, I find increasingly difficult to maintain. The admission of his feelings, however indirect, sent warmth spreading through her chest. For a moment she allowed herself to imagine a future where the complications of her past were resolved, where she could respond to the emotions evident in his gaze without reservation. "When Cedric's threat is neutralized," she said carefully, "when my position at court is secured by more than your favor, when Edrin's future is certain, then we might explore what lies between us without these shadows hanging over us." "A diplomatic answer," he observed with a rueful smile. "Worthy of my most trusted advisor. But honest nonetheless," she assured him, briefly allowing her hand to touch his on the stone parapet, a small breach of the careful boundaries they maintained in public. The contact, brief as it was, sent awareness coursing through both of them. For a heartbeat it seemed Alaric might close the distance between them, might transform this moment of understanding into something more tangible. The air between them charged with possibility. Then from below came the sound of horns, the signal for an approaching rider bearing urgent news. The moment shattered like crystal dropped on stone. Alaric stepped back, the king reasserting himself over the man. "We should return to the Great Hall. That's the second horn sequence, news from our northern scouts." Reality intruded with all its demands and dangers. Whatever had been building between them would have to wait, as it had been waiting for months, while they navigated the complex political landscape that surrounded them. As they descended the tower stairs side by side, Elswyn realized that Cedric's threat had accomplished at least one unexpected thing. It had forced both her and Alaric to acknowledge feelings they might otherwise have continued to circumnavigate with careful words and maintained distances. Whether that acknowledgement would lead to something more remained to be seen. For now, they had a kingdom to protect, and a baron's treachery to expose. Highwind Castle bustled with activity as preparations for the harvest festival reached their peak. Banners bearing the royal emblem of Thalwyn, the crowned wolf, hung from every tower, while the scent of fresh-baked bread and roasting meats wafted from the kitchens. Despite the celebratory atmosphere, an undercurrent of tension ran through the castle grounds. Duke Darius of Halford had accepted King Alaric's invitation and would arrive within days, accompanied by his daughter, Lady Mara, the very woman Baron Cedric intended to marry. In the royal nursery, Elswyn sat in a wooden rocking chair beside the window, watching Edrin play with wooden blocks on a colorful woolen rug. At 9 months old, her son had grown sturdy and curious, his auburn, hair curling slightly at the nape of his neck. His eyes, bright green like hers, followed the movement of birds outside the window, before returning to his toys. "He grows more remarkable each day," Lady Winna observed, entering with a tray of herbal tea. The royal healer had become something of a grandmother figure to Edrin, her weathered hands often the first to reach for him when he fussed. "And more like you, I might add. I see nothing of his father in him, thank the gods." Elswyn accepted a steaming cup gratefully. "Let us hope. Duke Darius doesn't see the resemblance when he arrives. Baron Cedric and I shared no children according to official records." "Bah," Winna scoffed, lowering her voice despite the privacy of the nursery. "Any fool with eyes can see this child was born of your body. But what man looks closely at an infant? They see what they expect to see. Let us hope you're right." Elswyn sipped her tea thoughtfully. "The Duke's visit may be our best chance to undermine Cedric's position without direct confrontation." Winna settled into a chair opposite her, watching Edrin stack blocks with surprising dexterity for his age. "And what does our king think of this strategy? He's grown rather protective of you both." A faint blush colored Elswyn's cheeks. Since their moment of near confession in the Eastern Tower 2 weeks prior, she and Alaric had maintained a careful professional distance in public. Yet private moments had become charged with unspoken awareness, lingering glances, and conversations that hovered on the edge of deeper waters. His Majesty supports any approach that minimizes risk to the kingdom, she replied diplomatically. Winna's knowing smile suggested she understood far more than Elswyn had said. Of course. His concern is purely for Thalwyn's welfare, I'm sure. Before Elswyn could respond, the nursery door opened to reveal Lord Commander Thorne, his expression grave, despite the attempt at a reassuring smile for Edron's benefit. Lady Elswyn, your presence is required in the King's private council chamber. Immediately. The urgency in his tone sent a chill through her. Has something happened? News from our northern scouts. The King requested you specifically. Elswyn rose quickly, smoothing her dress, a deep burgundy gown with silver accents that had become her signature colors at court. Of course. Lady Winna, would you— The boy will be fine with me, the healer assured her, already moving to distract Edron from his mother's departure. Go. The walk to the King's private council chamber felt interminable. Unlike the formal Great Hall, where larger meetings were held, this smaller room tucked behind the royal apartment served for matters requiring absolute discretion. Guards flanked its heavy oak door, their expressions revealing nothing as they admitted Elswyn and Thorne without announcement. Inside, Alaric stood bent over a map table, Chancellor Merrin and Lord Reynard on either side. The King looked up as they entered, his face lined with concern. Lady Elswyn, thank you for coming so quickly, he said, gesturing her forward. We've received troubling intelligence. She moved to the table, scanning the map where several markers indicated troop movements. Duke Darius has changed his mind about visiting? No, he remains committed to our trade discussions and departed Halford Castle yesterday, Alaric replied. The concern lies elsewhere. It seems Baron Cedric has dispatched a small force ahead of the Duke's party, not following the main road, but traveling through less guarded territories. Lord Commander Thorne pointed to a forested region near Thalwyn's northern border. A dozen men moving swiftly and secretly, not a military force but something more. Targeted. The implication hung heavy in the air. Elswyn's hands gripped the edge of the table as she processed what this meant. He's sending assassins, she said quietly. Not for the Duke, but for me. Or perhaps for Edron. He needs to eliminate the evidence of his treachery before Duke Darius arrives and sees the truth with his own eyes. That is our assessment as well, Alaric confirmed, his voice tight with controlled anger. Cedric cannot risk direct confrontation with Thalwyn, but a small force might penetrate our defenses, especially during the chaos of festival preparations. Lord Reynard cleared his throat. We should consider temporarily relocating Lady Elswyn and her son to one of the more remote royal properties until this threat passes. No, Elswyn said firmly, surprising even herself with her vehemence. Hiding now would only convince Duke Darius that there's truth to whatever lies Cedric has told about me. I must be present when he arrives. Your safety, Reynard began, is certainly a priority, she acknowledged. But so is exposing Baron Cedric's treachery. We cannot accomplish that if I'm secreted away like a shameful secret. Alaric studied, her face, respect evident in his eyes. What do you propose instead? Elswyn considered the map carefully. Increase security, certainly, but discreetly. Let it appear that we're focused entirely on preparations for the Duke's visit. Meanwhile, set a trap for Cedric's men. They'll be looking for information about my whereabouts, my routines. We can control what they find. Misinformation. Thorne nodded appreciatively. Feed them false details that lead them exactly where we want them. While ensuring Lady Elswyn and her son remain under constant protection, Alaric added firmly, making it clear this point was non-negotiable. Chancellor, Merrin adjusted his spectacles nervously. And what of the festival itself? Thousands will gather in the castle grounds. Maintaining security will be challenging. Which is precisely why Cedric chose this timing, Elswyn noted. But it can work to our advantage as well. His men will be searching for a woman and child who match our descriptions, not knowing how integrated we've become into court life. Over the next hour, they formulated a detailed strategy. Guards would be increased throughout the castle, though many would wear festival attire to blend with the celebrations. Elswyn and Idrin would maintain their normal routines, but with subtle variations known only to a select few. Most importantly, carefully crafted rumors would be spread regarding Elswyn's plans to take Edrun to the remote southern gardens during specific hours of the festival, creating a perfect opportunity for Cedric's assassins and a perfect trap for Thalwyn's forces. As the meeting concluded, Alaric asked Elswyn to remain behind. When the others had departed, he moved from behind the map table, the formal distance of king and advisor dissolving now that they were alone. "You're taking this threat with remarkable composure," he observed, studying her face closely. Elswyn's carefully maintained calm faltered slightly. "I've lived with Cedric's shadow looming over me for months. In some ways, it's almost a relief that he's finally made a direct move, one we can counter. Still, the danger to you and Edrin—" His voice trailed off, concern evident in every line of his face. "Is substantial," she acknowledged. "But not as great as the danger of allowing Cedric to strengthen his position through marriage to Lady Maera. If that alliance forms, his resources would double, and his next attempt might not be detected in advance." Alaric closed the distance between them, taking her hands in his. The gesture was bold by the standards of their usually restrained interactions, but the urgency of the situation seemed to have stripped away some of their careful boundaries. "I will not lose you," he said simply, his voice low and intense. "Not to Cedric, not to political necessity, not to anything." The naked emotion in his words sent warmth spreading through her chest. For months they had circled each other, duty and circumstance keeping their growing feelings contained in glances and carefully worded conversations. Now, with danger looming, pretense seemed suddenly inadequate. "Alaric," she began, her voice soft with feeling. A loud knock at the door interrupted whatever she might have said. They stepped apart quickly, resuming their proper positions as king and advisor, as Lord Commander Thorne entered with additional reports. The next 3 days passed in a blur of preparation and vigilance. Security throughout Highwind Castle increased substantially, though much of it remained invisible to casual observation. Elswyn continued her council duties and festival preparations, all while knowing that somewhere within the kingdom, men sent by her former husband were plotting her death. On the eve of the harvest festival, as twilight painted Highwind's towers in shades of gold and purple, Elswyn stood in her chambers while her handmaiden, Lyra, helped prepare her for the welcoming feast. Duke Darius had arrived that afternoon with a modest entourage that included his daughter, Lady Maera, though Elswyn had not yet encountered either of them. "The blue and silver gown, I think," Elswyn decided, indicating an elegant creation of midnight blue velvet with intricate silver embroidery. "With the wolf pendant His Majesty gifted me after the border negotiations." Lyra, a quiet girl of 42 with quick hands and observant eyes, nodded approvingly. "A wise choice, my lady. The colors of Thalwyn will remind all present where your loyalties now lie." As Lyra helped arrange her hair, swept up with artful tendrils framing her face, Elswyn found herself studying her reflection in the polished metal mirror. The woman who gazed back bore little resemblance to the terrified pregnant lady abandoned in the desert nearly a year ago. Her eyes held confidence now, her posture the quiet dignity of a woman who had found her place. "There will be many eyes upon you tonight," Lyra commented as she secured a delicate silver circlet among Elswyn's auburn waves. "The Duke is said to be most curious about the king's advisor from the south." "No doubt," Elswyn replied evenly. "And Lady Maera as well, I imagine." "A pretty girl, though lacking your presence," Lyra offered loyally. "They say Baron Cedric has sent her poems comparing her beauty to the dawn." Elswyn nearly laughed at the image. "Cedric has never written a poem in his life. He must have commissioned them from some court bard." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. When Lyra opened it, she found not a messenger, but King Alaric himself, resplendent in formal attire of black and silver, his crown glinting in the candlelight. "Your Majesty?" Lyra curtsied deeply, backing away as he entered. Elswyn rose to greet him, surprised by his personal appearance when protocol dictated they should meet in the Great Hall. "Is something wrong?" "Nothing unexpected," he assured her, though tension lined his face. "Our watchers have identified 3 of Cedric's men among the festival merchants. They're being monitored closely." She nodded, appreciating his directness. "Then our plan proceeds as discussed." "Yes, but He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain. "I wanted to see you before the formal introductions. Duke Darius is a shrewd observer, and Lady Mara will be looking for any reason to discount you." Understanding dawned. "You're concerned about how I'll react when facing them." "I have complete faith in your composure," he said quickly. "I merely thought, that is, I wanted to offer my personal support before you face this particular challenge." The gesture touched her deeply. Despite the demands of the festival, the arriving dignitaries, and the security threat, he had made time to check on her well-being. It spoke volumes about his priorities and his feelings. "Thank you," she said simply, allowing her gratitude to show in her eyes. "Your confidence means more than I can express." Something shifted in his expression as he took in her appearance. The elegant gown, the subtle crown-like circlet, the quiet dignity that had become her hallmark at court. For a moment, he seemed to forget the immediate dangers, his gaze softening with admiration. "You look every inch a queen," he murmured, then seemed startled by his own words. Before Elswyn could respond, another knock came, more urgent this time. Lord Commander Thorne's voice called through the door. "Your Majesty, we've apprehended one of Cedric's men attempting to access the royal nursery." The word sent ice through Elswyn's veins. "Edrin," she gasped, already moving toward the door. "He's safe," Thorne assured them as they emerged into the corridor. Lady Winna had him in the healer's chambers for his evening examination. The nursery was empty. Relief washed over her, quickly replaced by cold fury. "They targeted my son first." "A tactical decision," Alaric noted grimly as they strode toward the secured area where the prisoner was held. "A child would be easier to capture or harm than an adult constantly surrounded by others." The implications of how close they had come to tragedy hung heavy between them as they descended to the lower levels of the castle. Whatever else happened during the festival, one thing had become abundantly clear. Baron Cedric's desperation had crossed a threshold that could never be forgiven or forgotten. The time for careful political maneuvering was ending. The battle for Elswyn's future and Edrin's had truly begun. The captured assassin knelt in the center of the stone chamber, his wrists bound behind his back. Despite his predicament, the man maintained a defiant posture, his scarred face revealing little emotion as King Alaric and Lady Elswyn entered, followed by Lord Commander Thorne and 2 royal guards. "You were caught attempting to enter the royal nursery with this," Thorne stated, displaying a slender dagger with an ornate hilt. The blade gleamed with an oily sheen in the torchlight. "Poisoned. Designed to ensure death even from a minor wound." The Jew assassin remained silent, his eyes darting between the king and Elswyn, lingering on the latter with calculated assessment. "You recognize her," Alaric observed, his voice dangerously calm, despite never having met Lady Elswyn of Thalwyn before. A muscle twitched in the man's jaw, but still he said nothing. Elswyn stepped forward, her midnight blue gown whispering against the stone floor. "You were hired to kill my son," she said, not a question but a statement. "A child not yet a year old. What manner of honor exists in such a task?" The assassin's eyes narrowed slightly. "I follow orders, nothing more." "Baron Cedric's orders," Elswyn pressed, watching his reaction closely. A flicker of surprise crossed his features before he could mask it. "I don't know any Baron." "Yet you know me," she countered, "though I've never set foot in Dunhold since arriving in Thalwyn." The assassin shifted uncomfortably, realizing his mistake. Alaric moved closer, towering over the kneeling man. "Your companions remain at large," the king said, "for now. But they will be found, make no mistake. The question is whether you will share whatever fate awaits them." "I have nothing to say." "Then perhaps this will loosen your tongue." Thorn unfolded a piece of parchment bearing a familiar seal, the falcon clutching a serpent of House Dunhold. Found sewn into the lining of your cloak. Payment authorization. For services rendered to Baron Cedric, signed in his own hand. The assassin's composure finally cracked, his eyes widening as he realized the evidence against him, and by extension, against his employer. The Baron assured us this would be a simple task, he admitted, resignation replacing defiance. The woman and child were to be eliminated quietly during the festival chaos. No witnesses, no connection to him. And then, Alaric prompted, we were to leave evidence suggesting agents from the southern territories were responsible, creating the impression that Lady Elswyn had enemies from her supposed homeland. Elswyn's hands clenched at her sides, but her voice remained steady. Cedric always preferred elaborate schemes to direct confrontation. How many of you were sent? Thorn demanded. The assassin hesitated, then seemingly decided cooperation might be his only hope. 6 altogether. 2 to handle the child, 2 for the woman, 2 to create diversions if needed. And the others are still within the castle walls? Yes. Disguised as festival merchants. We were to act during tomorrow's main celebration, when security would be stretched thin. Alaric exchanged a glance with Thorn, who nodded, and immediately left to organize search parties. Once the door closed behind him, the king turned back to the assassin. You will provide detailed descriptions of your companions and your plans. In return, your life will be spared, though you'll never again see daylight from outside a cell. The man nodded. Defeated. I will tell you what you wish to know. Start with how Cedric identified us. Elswyn interjected. How did he confirm? I was here. A servant in the kitchens, the assassin replied. Paid to send reports north. He described a woman matching your appearance who arrived mysteriously and quickly gained the king's favor. The Baron became convinced when he learned of the child. Later, as they climbed the steps back toward the main level of the castle, Elswyn's mind raced with the implications of what they'd learned. The welcoming feast for Duke Darius would begin shortly, and now she would face him knowing that Cedric's assassin still moved freely among the festival crowds. We should postpone the feast, she suggested, pausing on the landing. At least until the remaining assassins are captured. Alaric shook his head. That would only alert them that their companion has been discovered. Better to proceed as planned, while Thorn's men hunt them quietly. The feast itself will be heavily guarded. And Edrin? Already moved to my private chambers with Lady Winna and 3 of my most trusted guards. No one will reach him there. The certainty in his voice provided some comfort, though anxiety still knotted her stomach. Cedric grows more dangerous with each failure. If tonight's attempt is thwarted, then we end this game once and for all. Alaric finished, his expression hardening. The evidence we've gathered is sufficient to expose his treachery to Duke Darius and Lady Maera. They had reached the corridor leading to Elswyn's chambers, where she would finish preparing for the feast. Alaric paused, looking down at her with an intensity that momentarily banished thoughts of assassins and political maneuvering. When this is over, he said quietly, when Cedric no longer threatens your safety or Edrin's, we will finish the conversation that keeps being interrupted. Her heart quickened at his words, at the promise they contained. Yes, she agreed simply, we will. The great hall of Highwind Castle blazed with hundreds of candles and torches, their light reflecting off polished silver and crystal. Long tables, arranged in a U-shape, filled the space, laden with the finest foods the harvest season had to offer. At the head table, King Alaric sat in his ornate chair, with Duke Darius of Halford to his right and Lady Elswyn to his left, a seating arrangement that communicated her importance to the court more clearly than any formal announcement could have done. Lady Maera, seated beside her father, was indeed beautiful, with delicate features and honey-blonde hair arranged in elaborate braids interwoven with pearls. Her pale blue gown complemented her fair coloring, and her manners were impeccable as she conversed with Chancellor Marin on her other side. Yet there was a calculating quality to her gaze as it repeatedly drifted toward Elswyn, assessing and measuring. Your harvest festival is renowned throughout the northern territories, Duke Darius commented to Alaric, his voice carrying just far enough for those at the high table to hear. The older man's shrewd eyes missed nothing as he surveyed the hall. Though I confess this is my first time experiencing it personally. Then we are doubly honored by your presence, Alaric replied smoothly, both for the trade discussions ahead and for the opportunity to share Thalwyn's traditions with our northern allies. Darius nodded, taking a measured sip of wine before his gaze settled on Elswyn. I understand you have brought new perspectives to the King's Council, my lady. Quite an accomplishment for someone so recently arrived from the south. The implied question hung in the air between them. Elswyn met his gaze directly, her composure unwavering, despite knowing that Lady Myera was watching the exchange with keen interest. His Majesty values diverse viewpoints, my Lord Duke. I've been fortunate to contribute where my experiences prove useful. And what experiences might those be? Lady Myera inquired, her voice sweet but her eyes sharp. The Southern Territories are known more for their vineyards than their political acumen. Perhaps that is precisely why fresh perspectives are valuable, Elswyn countered gently. Sometimes those outside traditional power structures see solutions others might overlook. An interesting philosophy, Darius mused, studying her more intently. You remind me of someone, Lady Elswyn, though I cannot quite place the resemblance. Alaric interjected smoothly. Lady Elswyn's insights regarding our eastern border dispute proved remarkably effective, a diplomatic solution where many counseled military action. Indeed, Darius's interest seemed genuine now. The Eastern Territories have been troublesome neighbors for generations. How did you manage what so many before you could not? As Elswyn explained her approach to the border conflict, she noticed Lady Myera's attention drifting toward the entrance of the Great Hall. Following her gaze, Elswyn spotted Lord Commander Thorne entering discreetly, his expression grim as he caught the king's eye and gave an almost imperceptible nod. They had found the remaining assassins. Alaric acknowledged the signal with the slightest inclination of his head before returning his attention to the conversation, though Elswyn noted the new tension in his shoulders. Whatever was happening beyond the feast would proceed without disrupting the diplomatic proceedings, at least for now. A fascinating approach, Darius was saying as she refocused on their discussion. Baron Cedric mentioned you had an advisor with unusual methods, but he failed to convey the innovation behind them. You've spoken with Baron Cedric about me? Elswyn asked, keeping her tone merely curious rather than alarmed. Briefly, during his last visit to Halford Castle. Darius raised an eyebrow. He seemed concerned about your influence here, though now that we've met, I find his concerns rather puzzling. Lady Myera leaned forward slightly. Father, surely you recall what else the Baron mentioned? About Lady Elswyn's striking resemblance to his late wife. The directness of the statement sent a ripple of tension through the high table. Elswyn maintained her composure, though she felt Alaric stiffen beside her. I recall, Darius replied, carefully, his eyes never leaving Elswyn's face. Though having never met the late Lady of Dunhold, I cannot judge the accuracy of the comparison. How fortunate you are to have that distance, my lord, Elswyn said quietly. Others at court have made similar observations about resemblances. I've found it best to let such speculations fade with time, rather than dignify them with denial or confirmation. Darius's mouth quirked in what might have been approval. A diplomatic answer, my lady, worthy of a king's advisor. Before the conversation could continue further, a commotion near the entrance drew everyone's attention. A guard captain approached the high table swiftly, bowing low before leaning to whisper urgently in Alaric's ear. The king's expression darkened as he listened. Then he rose to his feet, silencing the hall immediately. Honored guests, I must beg your indulgence for a brief interruption, he announced, his voice carrying to every corner of the vast space. A matter requiring my immediate attention has arisen. Please continue enjoying the feast. I shall return shortly. As he turned to leave, his eyes met Elswyn's briefly, a silent communication that told her to remain with their guests. Whatever had happened, he would handle it without exposing the larger threat that still loomed over the festival. Duke Darius watched the king's departure with raised eyebrows. Court life is never dull, it seems, particularly during festivals, Elswyn agreed smoothly. Though I'm certain it's nothing that will disrupt our trade discussions. Lady Mayara's gaze had sharpened with interest. You seem untroubled by His Majesty's sudden departure, Lady Elswyn. Most royal favorites would be more anxious when summoned away so abruptly. The deliberate provocation was transparent, but Elswyn refused to rise to the bait. His Majesty leads a kingdom, my lady. His responsibilities extend far beyond this hall, or any individual within it. How admirably selfless, Mayara replied, a hint of mockery in her tone. One might almost believe. You truly are merely an advisor. Duke Darius shot his daughter a warning glance. Mayara, mind your manners. We are guests here. Forgive me, father, she demurred, though her eyes remained challenging as they held Elswyn's. I merely find it curious that a woman with no apparent political background has risen so quickly to such prominence. Merit knows no geography, my lady, Elswyn responded evenly. Just as beauty is not confined to the northern territories. The compliment, unexpected after Mayara's barely veiled hostility, seemed to catch the younger woman off guard. She blinked, reassessing Elswyn with newfound wariness. Duke Darius chuckled softly. Well parried, Lady Elswyn. I begin to understand why King Alaric values your counsel. The feast continued with surface pleasantries masking the undercurrents of assessment and calculation. Elswyn maintained her composure throughout, though her mind raced with possibilities regarding what might have drawn Alaric away so urgently. Had another assassin been captured? Or worse, had one escaped? Nearly an hour passed before the king returned, his expression grave but controlled as he resumed his seat at the high table. Leaning close to Elswyn under the pretense of reaching for his wine goblet, he murmured, All 6 accounted for. We'll speak later. Relief washed through her, though she kept her expression neutral. Across the table she noticed Lady Mayara watching their brief interaction with narrowed eyes. As the evening progressed and the formal feast gave way to entertainment, minstrels performing harvest songs, followed by acrobats from the eastern territories, Duke Darius engaged Elswyn in increasingly direct conversation about Thalwyn's policies and her role in shaping them. His questions were probing but not hostile, giving her the distinct impression he was forming his own assessment, independent of whatever Baron Cedric might have told him. You've built quite a life here in a relatively short time, he observed, during a lull in the performances. A position of influence, the king's evident trust, even a child, I'm told. The mention of Edrin sent a jolt of alarm through her, though she maintained her composure. Yes, my son, he remains in the nursery tonight. Festival celebrations are rather overwhelming for one so young. A boy, then. How fortunate. Darius's gaze grew more pointed. Baron Cedric mentioned your child as well, though he seemed to believe the boy might be of particular lineage. Elswyn felt Alaric tense beside her, ready to intervene, but she placed a gentle hand on his arm beneath the table, a silent request to let her handle this delicate moment. My son's lineage is indeed particular, my Lord Duke, she replied carefully, as is every child's. But if you're asking whether Baron Cedric has any claim to him, I can assure you he does not. It was neither confirmation nor denial of Cedric's suspicions, merely a statement that placed boundaries around what she was willing to discuss. Darius studied her for a long moment before nodding slightly, as if reaching a private conclusion. I look forward to continuing our conversations tomorrow, Lady Elswyn, perhaps during the festival proper, when we might speak more freely. I would welcome that, my Lord Duke. As the feast finally concluded and guests began retiring to their chambers, Alaric escorted both Duke Darius and Lady Mayara to the wing prepared for northern visitors. Elswyn remained behind briefly, conferring with Lady Winna, who had slipped into the hall to report that Edrin remained safe and sleeping peacefully in the king's chambers. He didn't stir even when the guards changed, Winna assured her, though he clutched this rather fiercely. She held out a small wooden wolf figurine, a gift from Alaric that had become Edrin's favorite toy. Elswyn took it gratefully, the tangible connection to her son providing comfort after the tense evening. Thank you for watching over him. Always, Winna replied with genuine affection. Now go get some rest yourself. Tomorrow will bring its own challenges. Indeed it would. As Elswyn made her way toward her chambers, escorted by 2 royal guards, she knew that the dance with Duke Darius had only just begun. The Duke was clearly suspicious, yet open to forming his own impressions rather than relying solely on Cedric's claims. Lady Maera, however, seemed already aligned against her, perhaps out of loyalty to her prospective husband, or perhaps from simpler jealousy of Elswyn's position at court. Either way, tomorrow's festival would bring matters to a head. With Cedric's assassins captured but the Baron himself still plotting in the north, the time for half-truths and careful deflections was drawing to a close. Soon, very soon, she would need to stand fully in her truth, not as Lady Elswyn of the Southern Territories, but as the woman who had survived Baron Cedric's betrayal and built a new life from the ashes of his treachery. The vows were spoken. The kingdom held its breath, but peace is a fragile crown to wear. As drums beat in the distance and steel is drawn, Elswyn must face not only an enemy rising beyond the walls, but the truth that may fracture everything. She's built. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Click here and watch the next episode.